Hey everybody, in this video we're talking about who bears the burden of a tariff. Is it the foreign producer or the domestic consumer? Now, I want you to understand that this is actually a slightly more complicated question than the way that we're going to frame it for the majority of this video. Usually we frame this kind of in binary terms between the foreign producer and the domestic consumer. But at the end, I'm going to introduce how this is actually a little bit more complex than that, but you got to wait to the end to see that. For the bulk of this video, for the major learning of this video, I'm going to keep with the general frames we usually hear, which is foreign producers, domestic consumers. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick look at this graph. It might not be that quick, but I'm going to try to get through it as quickly as possible, which is a graph you'll learn in an international class, usually a 101 international class in college, okay? Not an upper division international class, but like a 101 level, okay? It's a graph that a lot of people out there have been introduced to, and it is the graph that contributes to some people out there saying the full burden of tariffs is paid by the consumer. It's because they learned this graph in a college class, but we're going to find out that there's a huge simplification in this model that gives us this kind of erroneous conclusion that the full burden is going to fall on domestic consumers. So let's get really quickly up to date with this model. We've got a domestic market for good A, and in this model, this country is a net importer of the good, okay? Now I need to add something very quickly to this model, which is price world, okay? That price world is being set in a world market, which I'm going to say is to the left of this graph. So we got some world market over here where all the suppliers and demanders of the good in the entire world are coming together, and a price world is being set. And so I'm going to put a price world right there. And at that price world, this horizontal distance from right there to there is going to be the quantity supplied domestically by domestic firms. Okay, so that's how much is going to be being produced domestically. This horizontal distance is going to be the quantity demanded domestically, which means the difference between this horizontal distance and this horizontal distance are the imports. Those are coming from the rest of the world. Now here is the interesting thing about this graph and why it does not at all apply to the United States. We draw supply world perfectly elastic, okay? Now, when we draw a supply world perfectly elastic, what we are doing at that moment is we are assuming that this country is a small country. In fact, an infinitesimally small country. What we are saying is the foreign suppliers, this curve right here that makes up the foreign suppliers, they have perfect options, perfect alternatives to go sell their good in the world market at this price and no lower. To make the point clear, guys, what we are saying is this country, when we draw this curve like this, could not buy any imports at all. Stop buying all of these imports, and price world in the rest of the world would stay this amount. It wouldn't go down at all. That is not true if this country is of any size at all. When they stop buying goods, what you will see is that decrease in demand for the good is going to cause the world price to actually go down. But let's finish off the model and show what we mean, okay, and why people get this kind of erroneous conclusion. So again, they draw a supply world perfectly horizontal, saying the foreign suppliers have perfect options to go sell their goods at this price. They don't have to take any price hit. And so when a tariff is added to the good, the foreign producers, let's say this is the amount of the tariff, is going to add that full amount onto the price. And by the way, that's what we're looking for to see how much of the burden the consumer takes on of any type of indirect tax. We say, look, how much was that per unit tax, in this case a per unit tariff, and how much did the consumer's price go up? If it goes up by the full amount, then they're taking on the full burden. So we're going to put right here is price world plus tariff. We're going to say the entire tariff is being tacked onto the price. The domestic consumer is taking on the full burden. Now, what happens in this particular case is you do get an increase in the quantity supplied domestically. Okay, so there we go. We get that increase in the quantity supplied domestically. You also get a decrease in the quantity demanded domestically as that price goes up. Okay, so the imports, which used to be this, become this amount. But what that means is we're buying this plus this less. So again, this was the imports, this now is the imports, which means this plus this is how much less we're buying of this good. And in that particular case, if this is the United States, which is a big country in world trade, we would expect the price world to actually go down, which means this curve should not be drawn perfectly elastic, which also means they're not going to be able to pass on the full burden onto the domestic consumer. Okay, So we need a new graph. So we're going to erase this graph. We're going to put in a new graph, and we're going to change our title ever so slightly, okay? We are now going to draw a graph, a domestic market for imports. That's a little bit hard to get your head around, okay? Imports of good A. So the only thing that's happening in this particular market is we're buying foreign produced goods. I want you to think there's another market right to the right of this where domestically produced goods, okay, good A is being produced domestically, bought and sold. So I've got a market of imports and a market for domestically produced goods of good A, okay? So in this particular in this situation, we're going to again put P, again put Q, okay? I've got my supply foreign, which you can think of, that's that supply world curve, and now I'm showing some level of inelasticity, okay? Hey, there is they don't have perfect alternatives. If they try to go sell their good abroad, they're gonna have to take on a lower price. So there's some inelasticity of their curve, and that's what we're trying to show right there. But the other side of the argument says foreign producers are going to take on the full burden. And the only way that could be the case, that foreign producers take on the full burden, is demand domestic is perfectly elastic. Now, what is this side of the argument saying? It's saying domestic consumers have perfect alternatives. Now, what would that mean? Well, I'm going to put price original. It would mean that if the foreign suppliers tried to raise the price at all, the domestic consumer could leave this market, go to that market over there and buy the good from the domestic producers, but here's the key, at the exact same price. But that's not what's going to happen. There's going to be capacity constraints over there, okay? The supply domestic curve is also going to be upward sloping because of the capacity constraints. And it might be quite vertical, okay? Or not vertical, but quite steep, okay? And so what we need to think about here is if they try to raise the price at all, yes, there's going to be a desire to head over to that other market. But as demand starts heading to that other market, what's going to happen is the price is actually going to go up. And if the price actually starts going up for the domestically produced goods, the domestic consumer in this market does not have perfect options. To have perfect options, it means they can go to the alternative market and buy it at the exact same price. But the act of heading to that other market, increasing that demand, they're going to find capacity constraints of the domestic production, and so the price is going to go up. So I need to change the shape of this curve. This curve also needs to have some inelasticity. So let's draw it with some inelasticity. So in reality, there's inelasticity in the supply foreign or supply world, and there's inelasticity in the demand domestic curves. Now, what does that mean? Well, I want to go ahead and mark that intersection point, okay? So that's my price original again. I've got my tariff, okay? And that tariff is actually going to straddle that price, okay? Maybe it might not be 50-50, but it's not going to be sitting all on top of that price or all underneath. It's going to straddle it. Now, what do I mean by that, okay? So here's my tariff. I'm going to bring it in. I'm going to just draw it right like that. So we're going to call that vertical distance the amount of the tariff. So what we will see in this particular case is this is price consumer. It is going to go up, but this is the amount of the tariff. That's the amount the price went up. Amount of the tariff, amount the consumer's price went up. Are they going to take on some burden? Yes, but are they going to take on all the burden? Absolutely not. And then we're going to show the price producer foreign. They are going to take on some of the hit. They're not going to be able to pass the full burden of the tariff on. They're going to have to eat some of the burden of the tariff also. The tariff is going to get shared between the domestic consumers and the foreign producers. Now, how much falls on the consumer and the foreign producer is not always this and this, okay? You can't go measure that, zoom in and measure that, say, oh, it's whatever that percentage, what percentage of this is of this. You can't do that. It has to do with their relative options. What are the options of domestic consumers? Do those domestic businesses who are also making the good have a lot of capacity or a little capacity? Is the good a need or is the good kind of a want, okay? What are the options? I mean, one option could be they don't need to buy the good, but do they need to buy the good? And then what's the capacity constraint, again, of those of the domestic producers? Also the foreign producers, what are their options? Do they have to produce the good? Can they sell it in other markets at a close to the same price as price world? So it comes down to the relative options of the two, but here's what we know from the data that is out there. It ends up getting shared. Sometimes the consumer takes on, say, 20%, sometimes they take on 80%, okay? But the burden gets shared. When we have a tariff, we can rest assured some of the burden's gonna fall on domestic consumers. They're gonna pay some of it, and some of the burden's gonna fall on foreign producers. Now, that little extra bit of, sorry about that, of complexity here. It's not as binary as that. What we really need to say is there's a consumer and then there are the producers, plural. And some of the producers of even foreign produced goods are domestic companies, okay? What do I mean by that? You manufacture a shirt abroad. Well, that shirt, after it's manufactured, it's gotta be taken to a port in that other country. From the port, it gets on an ocean liner. An ocean liner, it gets to our country's port. From our port, it's gotta get onto a train or a truck. From there to a warehouse, and from the warehouse to a retail outlet or to the consumer's doorstep. There are a lot of domestic businesses involved in the supply of foreign produced goods, or foreign manufactured is probably the best way to say it. In foreign manufactured goods, there's a lot of domestic businesses involved. And so really the burden of a tariff is going to be split between three groups. There's my bell. That bell tells me I got to end this video quickly. So it's going to be split between three groups. The foreign producer is going to take on some of the burden. The domestic producer is going to, and I remember the domestic producer of the good is that part of the supply chain to get it to the domestic consumer. And then the domestic consumer is going to take on some of the burden. What does that mean? It means that when we impose tariffs, okay, U.S. resources are going to take on some of the burden of the tariff. Yes, foreign resources, okay, foreign actors are going to take on some of the burden. They are one of the three parts that are going to take on the burden. Sometimes those foreign actors might take on a good percent and sometimes a very small percent, but the burden is going to actually be shared, again, between the foreign producers, which is the manufacturers and those involved in the supply chain of getting it either to the ocean liner or all the way to our ports, and then the domestic businesses involved in getting it to the consumer and then the consumer themselves. So tariffs, they actually get split between three groups, and they do get split between all three groups. Maybe not equally, but some of that burden is going to fall on all three groups. We can rest assured. Hope that makes sense to you. We'll see you in the next video.